Thank you. Hi everybody. So we heard a lot today about like AI in general, and bits and pieces here and there, but I wanted this talk is going to be focused exclusively on the usage of AI, different tips and tricks. It sounds like basically almost everybody here, plenty of people here have used it in some capacity, but hopefully you'll still be able to pick up something from like the framings or different tips and tricks that I'll mention today. So just a bit about me. I'm an independent scholar. I work in tech full time. This is kind of like I do this on the side in a sense. My background's in the Talmud department at Bar Ilan. I also have a master's from Yeshiva University. I'm especially interested in Rabbinic, specifically Talmud, as well as digital humanities, linguistics. So just the basic definitions and premises for today. AI, people use AI, but more technically AI is LLMs, large language models, which are usually accessed by chatbots. It can also be accessed through APIs. We won't talk about that today. AI, of course, especially at this stage, is not a replacement. It can only enhance scholarship. It's a very popular tool, and I'll talk about exactly like what a good way to think about it is. Obviously, there's the issue of hallucinations. This is very well known, especially in rabbinics. The major issue is not necessarily for making stuff up, which of course it does that as well, but misinterpretations, that's the biggest issue. So you do obviously have to verify. Best practice is to use paid to get the best models. And prompt engineering, what's called prompt engineering is very important as well. We'll talk about that as well. Contrary to intuition, I think a lot of people when they first hear about it, they think, okay, this is like a replacement for Google, which it can be for certain things, but I think for scholarship, it's typically not the best for discovery and research, finding scholarship. I think the best way to think about AI for this is as a very verbal, basically flawless English, Hebrew, everything. Very eager as a kind of research assistant. It's a generalist, jack of all trades. It basically has a general idea of everything, but not expertise in anything. It doesn't really have domain knowledge. There are ways of fixing that, but out of the box, definitely not. And in addition, there's no magic, so it's not creating new forms of scholarship. It's generally not good for coming up with like chidushim for anything new at all, but it does save a lot of time. So again, it's called prompt engineering, so knowing how to ask the question is very important. So for a few people mentioned, so iterative, so like keep on working on the query, custom instructions, so if you pay for it, all the tools now, they let you put in custom instructions and say, okay, this is how you should act as a rabbinic scholar, act as a Talmud scholar, act as this, and it definitely very much improves the responses. And again, the more you're going to be doing a certain thing, the more worthwhile it is to invest. I'm not going to go through all these, but there are all sorts of ways of tweakings to make it more relevant. So again, this is fairly well known as a persona, so act as an academic scholar of rabbinics. There are all sorts of words that are generally you want to. It's gotten better, but there are all sorts of things that like the default you don't necessarily want. So words like tapestry, and specifically for something more academic, you wouldn't like the default is Gemara. You want to say Talmud, things like that. And then there's kind of more technical things like examples, something that came up earlier in the questions, as well as JSON. Okay, so the major use cases, and especially what we'll be focusing on today, is processing text. So again, for actual research, discovery, and all that, not necessarily the best. So the focus here, and I personally find it most useful for processing text, acting as a style editor. So basically, the kind of thing you'd give to an editor and say, okay, improve this, improve the English, improve the Hebrew, whatever. This is fairly well known. We're not going to discuss that. Translation, which we'll go into a bit more. AI is really good at translation. Visualization, this is something you use it for all the time as well, that I think is really good. For summarization, for analysis, creating tables, flowcharts, bullet points. Again, of course, everything has to be checked, and generally you have to make a lot of changes, but it's very good at this. Also very good for coding for people such as myself. I don't have like a hardcore technical coding background, but in the last 2 years I've been able to like play around, do interesting things I think with coding, and AI really enables that. I'm not going to go into such detail, but again, accessing texts like Safaria, other sources via API, computational text analysis, a lot of this kind of thing was discussed earlier in various talks, not necessarily the technical side, but AI very much helps with that, so things like regex and identity recognition, word counts, things like that. Okay, so the first thing is translation. I'm sure most people, everybody here knows that Google Translate is basically unusable for Rabbinics, for Talmud, anything else. It's very much optimized for modern Hebrew. It's true for all languages. It's optimized for kind of like the modern formal language. However, AI is really good at this. It does very well with all forms of Hebrew, as well as Jewish Aramaic and really anything that you want. So a great thing about it is, first of all, it understands technical terminology. So I give an example here. This is from something I did with analyzing the Mishnah's literary structure. So here the Mishnah in Megillah gives a list of like special Shabbatot, what you say, and so it's fairly technical. There are technical terms like paraduma, as well as parshiot with what's called incipit, so the first few words. So obviously you put this into Google Translate, it comes out essentially gibberish, but AI is, if you say, okay, I'm giving you a Mishnah, translate it right out of the box. Both ChatGPT as well as Claude, they do a really good job with this. And again, obviously everything has to be checked, but essentially the translation I gave here is basically what came out, and it's very helpful. It really speeds things along. So just an example of like a proper prompt, like things you can add. Okay, give an academic critical style, add things in parentheses. You can even say like add glosses at the end for things that might be helpful, italics, bolding, etc., etc. Another really amazing use case is for analysis and summarization. Again, this is something that AI is really good at processing text, so visual tools. So summarization, we basically say, okay, here's all this text, summarize it, visual tables, flowcharts, so I'll give examples of that. So one example, this is something I looked at recently, Tchiyat HaMetim Min HaTorah, where you have the famous sugya at the beginning of Perek Chelek. So you have all these examples, Mikan Tchiyat HaMetim Min HaTorah, Minayin Tchiyat HaMetim Min HaTorah. So I took the whole thing, put it into ChatGPT, and I say, and again, this is with custom instructions, my preferences, and I say, okay, generate a table, the person who's saying it, and the interpretation, the proof text, what kind of thing it is, and it basically comes out with very good starting tables. This would have taken at least half an hour, and this does it in a few seconds. Another really good thing is for bullet points. We saw it earlier. I think this, as was discussed earlier a few times, literary structure, I think this is somewhat a bit underrated, and we saw from Shal Lieberman, like he mentions like the literary aspect, and so ChatGPT is very good at picking up on that and basically saying, okay, focus on breaking down the structure, bullet points, and again with the technical terms, it does a very good job with that. Visualization, this is something that Claude, other AI chatbot, is especially good with this. It's able to create this within the chatbot experience. You say, give me a visualization. This is from a Mishnah at the end of Yadayim, a pretty famous one. It's a very long Mishnah where there's a whole kind of like Shakla V'Tarya, which obviously is common in the Bavli and in the Yerushalmi, but much less common in Mishnah. And here you have, I basically put it in and I said, okay, break this down for me, give me a visualization, and it right out of the box gives me a very good one, and something that you could also like iterate on and go back and forth on. Another important thing is for synthesis of secondary sources. So until now we're kind of talking about looking at the primary text, but if you could literally put in a few hundred pages of something, your own writing, someone else's writing, and say, give me a summary, give me a synthesis of it, rewrite it, and it does very good job. Claude is especially good with this in terms of fewer hallucinations. I think I have the next slide. If anybody. Gemini. So Gemini has like what's called like huge context windows. So you could essentially upload 300 pages worth of text, and it can summarize it and do all sorts of interesting things with it. I'll quickly talk about coding as well, which I mentioned earlier. So again, this used to be far less accessible. Now it's more accessible. So you could access data through API, pattern recognition, something called regex, which is fairly complex, but it's a kind of advanced search. Pattern recognition, word count analysis, all these things are now a lot more accessible than they used to be. Discussed earlier a few times, named entity recognition, so mapping people, places, and concepts. So I mentioned a few different tools. There are also open access that sources are obviously not necessarily as good, but they could be tweaked with in natural language, all sorts of natural language processing, which also Dicta has as well. But it's a lot more that it's possible to customize it. So to conclude, I think the best way, again, verification is essential due to hallucinations. Can't be a replacement for scholarship. AI is an assistant, incredible tool. It really helps with processing, translation, summarization, visualization, all these things. Technical approaches, and the space is moving very quickly. So I've tested this out over the last 2 years. OCR is something which is a very strong interest of mine, especially for manuscripts. So being able to put in a manuscript and say, okay, give me the text, and Transcribus, there's all these tools that exist. Not ideal. Hopefully this will improve. Larger context windows, which Gemini has. Now there's all these there's ChatGPT has something called O3, where it does a lot more what's called grounding. It'll check for sources, and it actually works really well. And I think for the first time, there's some possibly promising original research that could come out of it, but currently it's not there yet, and it's a fast-moving space, so hopefully that'll happen soon. And that's it. Thank you. Feel free to reach out.